Hi everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. I'm so excited to be with you to explore the role that simulations play in our current push for test results. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the question. There's a chat box on the right. Feel free to put any comments or questions for me in there, but I wanted to ask you guys a question if you don't mind to go ahead and put your answer in while I'm introducing myself. I wanted to see where you stand at this moment on simulations, the good, the bad, any view you currently hold about using them in your classrooms. So I'll go ahead and start introducing myself because I know sometimes it takes a little bit of time to type it in there. So don't worry about spelling or grammar. Just throw out some ideas about simulations that you currently have. So my name is Melissa Knowles. I've been teaching for 17 years. I've taught grade levels from K to 8, but in my current role as a media specialist, I do get to collaborate with high school teachers. And having high schoolers myself, I definitely have a view about this in the older grade levels. So let's get started. All right. So I wondered, why do some classrooms avoid simulations and why do some classes use simulations? So let's look at some of the things that you guys have said. So Catherine is a new teacher. She loves some of them, but there are some issues with sensitivity and heritage, especially teaching US history up to Reconstruction. Completely understandable, and we are going to bring some of that up. So that is an excellent question, and that would definitely be a reason that you would avoid them and not feel comfortable doing it. Julie likes the hands-on aspect, but sometimes they can get complicated and lose focus. So true. And sometimes they can even be so much fun the students forget they're learning. So that is absolutely, you really have to guide students and pick and choose very creatively. And Manuel, he works in a high school with students, anything, and you're wanting anything that's not lecture to get them engaged. Right, so that's a reason to include them because simulations are incredibly engaging. Excellent. So if we find any more, we will go through those, and I hope that I hit some of the things that we're talking about, and we can maybe find some solutions, or, you know, sometimes in your classroom, things don't fit, and that's understandable also. So I enjoy simulations. With simulations, I think students can do a sort of course, I had to bring the media specialist out in me, choose your own adventure. So I love the fact that in simulations, there is so much student choice. They get to decide the outcome and then connect the events through their choices and see, because of what they chose, how it played out. And I found this phrase somewhere at some point that I love. Simulations are student-centered experiential learning. The students actually get to experience, engage emotionally a lot of times, as you said, Catherine, in their learning. So let's keep going. Oh, one other thing that I wanted to bring out with simulations is that they can repeat the scenario, so they can come to different outcomes based on their choices in some simulations. Of course, there are all kinds of different types of simulations, different lengths. So just remember that in simulations, students create their learning through experiences, and that is where I think the real learning and memory comes from in teaching to our students. So I wanted to put this out there too. How many students remember what they were taught in previous years? So you guys as upper level teachers, most of the time the students have learned this material before in a younger grade. How much reteaching are you having to do? Are the students actually learning it? Or are you really spending a lot of time reviewing and getting the background knowledge in before you can even move on to your deeper curriculum? So I'm really interested to hear what you say on this. There was another um, sort of question that I was thinking of also, and that is how many students come back to you and say, oh, that lecture you gave on the Civil War was amazing. Or those end of chapter questions, thank you so much for those. You know, that usually doesn't happen. However, in simulations, the students do remember. They do engage when, and it follows them. They're also then able to understand those concepts that you're giving them, or maybe why the people in during the Reconstruction, why did they feel that way? What was their reasoning behind it? Or when immigrants were, when it was determined whether they were going to be able to stay or not, do we want them? Do we not want them? You know, what were they thinking then? So Catherine says most of her students had social studies cut in favor of STAR. Oh, wow. That is true too. In the elementary grade levels, you get a lot of, I don't have time. So sometimes your eighth graders don't know the difference between England and New England and England. That is sad. And there's something wrong with that. But I think there's something wrong also with teaching when children aren't actually learning, just teaching for the test or teaching just to remember for this week and then it's gone. Julie spends 2 to 3 weeks reviewing. And that's right, there is a big gap at our groups also. So once they get fifth grade American history, they don't see it again until 10th grade here. So, and I'm in Alabama, but wow, that is a long gap. So, you know, I feel that using simulations with content would help some of that because they would remember and they would be able to relate to the things they had done and felt. So I was a media specialist at a junior high school. Our eighth grade teacher taught ancient history, and she was the lucky one to teach about the Black Death. When I saw those students and how proudly they wore, whether they lived or died on that during the time period, they had a little sticker on, and I still remember that. I remember that simulation because she did it in the library and I watched how her students reacted to it. So I think you guys all know how these can be used for the positive and how much better they are for students for developing deeper understanding. They get to actually see other people's point of views. It's hands-on. In science, could you imagine science without experiments? Well, I feel like we need to put social studies in that frame of mind also. We really can't do social studies without putting the kids in there thinking deeply and going beyond surface level learning to really understand. And my goodness, if not now, when we very much need to build good citizens and build students that can think and make decisions on their own, I think now is the time to make that change. So let's go to what a typical simulation looks like. So I've got just 4 steps here. So background, your prior knowledge, all that reviewing that you're doing prior to, so that students will be successful. Sometimes you want, and we're going to look at a simulation in just a minute, of one where you really don't want them to know a whole lot about it so that they can come up with their own decisions. And then you can learn, you know, the real things or what really happened. But this gives the students some different viewpoints, different identities, different reasoning, and then whether their reasoning changes or not, based on what they learn. That's what our citizens are going to have to do later in life when they read news or read articles or anything. They'll have to, they may change their mind and they have to be okay with that or not. They may be just completely rigid, but we want to give them opportunities to be able to see things from different sides. So building that prior knowledge is important. Number two, they assume identities or roles of other people. Sometimes it doesn't even have to be a role, and we're going to look at that also in just a minute. Then there's the actual simulation. So you give them the purpose for the simulation, give them the directions, and then I encourage you very much to stand back. It's kind of hard sometimes not to help them and guide them to where you want, but you really want to try to help them make their own decisions and their own choices, because that's what's going to help them then later on be able to learn, oh, that person has a better perspective than mine. I didn't think about that. Okay, that's good. They can change, they can see where maybe their thinking went astray. Maybe they got stuck on some misinformation. All this happens in real life. So if they need help, of course you will help, but try not to help them, especially with a decision. And then number 4 is so important and just the easiest one to forget about or to say, I don't quite have time to do that, but the debriefing is where students analyze their actions and the events that happened. They get to communicate, they get to listen. I love calling these roundtables. They also get to then look at their emotions and feelings. Some kids can get really upset and uptight about things that have happened. Another thing I like to see is for them to talk about their viewpoints. So if they're explaining their thinking, that's a much higher level and a much better understanding of the situation. And then they listen to someone else explain their side and their viewpoint. You can come to even whole class decisions or allow students to change their mind. So if they came up with a decision and then you had the debriefing, give them a little bit of time to maybe change their decision in that they made based on what other people said. And also then tell you why they did it. Very important too. So please do not skip debriefing, even if it's just a whole class short talk, or maybe they just write their opinions on the board and you guys spend a few minutes reading those decisions and maybe come up with some interesting ones or talk about a few interesting ones. And then this is also a good opportunity to request feedback on your simulation. So, when you're talking about losing focus and some being complicated, this is a great time for students to say, this part I didn't like so much, or this was a little confusing. And then you can tweak them a little bit for the next year to then make the simulation work a little bit better. Or you may want to even cut that part out if you didn't need it as much. You can always add in that information just on your own, depending on how it fits into the simulation. So definitely use this time to ask about students' opinions about it. Also, it makes them feel sort of, excited that you care about what they think and that they're sort of having a decision on what happens in the future. So I would like to now look at 3 simulations in Active Classroom. And I just chose 3. But there are so many simulations. Some are 50 minutes, some are 600 minutes. You've got all kinds of variation in there. However, most of the really long ones also include adaptations to shorten them. All the materials you'll need to complete them, different ways to assess are all there. So this is a 100-minute lesson. And let me go ahead into this activity. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. So in this simulation, students role play as immigrants. They're preparing for the journey to America. During the simulation, they experience conditions of the passage. They go through the checkpoints and inspections. They complete the paperwork. Not exactly the same, but they get an idea of what the paperwork and what the immigrants had to go through as they faced Ellis Island. Also included are alternate activities to increase flexibility. So know that those are in there too. It includes a teacher guide that is step by step. So the gist of this simulation follows pretty much the same path we just talked about. So first, the students choose a role. There are role cards provided for you. All kinds of different types of people from different places that are the typical people that would have immigrated to America in 1907. It was a bigger immigration time. Then the students prepare for their trip. They have to select what they need. And here's where you have some decisions to make. You can tell them that they can only bring one suitcase. So they're having to prioritize what's important to bring. And then something I like, so when you go actually onto the journey, you're using masking tape to make an outline of the ship. And you need to make sure for your student group that it would be cramped for those immigrants coming in and their belongings. So they've got to hold them, and you can see in the image how cramped it was, except for one person who's in a first class cabin. So that person, everyone else is going to be highly upset with, I think. So one thing you can do is maybe have the captain, which could be you or someone else, say that our ship's too overcrowded, you guys have to leave one personal item behind. So then after they've already gone through picking the very bare minimum of what they're going to take, they then have to add a little fun twist and get rid of something else. So during this time, you can have, so when they get to Ellis Island, you can have strangers, other adults, people they don't know, come so that they would sort of get the feeling of a little apprehensiveness. If you have a resource officer on your campus, you may could ask them to do it so that they sort of feel what the immigrants felt. So as they leave the ship, they get identification tags, they get an inspection card, which must be stamped by this official, except the immigrant in first class, who happens to be from England. He doesn't even have to leave the cabin. The inspector comes, asks him a few questions, and then stamps him, and he's on his way. Now the others have to go through the process. Now, we talked about some things that may be a little bit sensitive. And there is something in here. So you know that the immigrants were marked with signs for physical or mental illness. And you can imagine how that might play out in your classroom. So they use like H for heart problems, L for lameness, X for mental defects. One thing you can do to make this sensitive topic a little bit less sensitive is just to have the inspector scribble something without explaining what it was. They just mark a few things, look at them, and there's a whole questionnaire in there. How much money do you have? Let me see it. You can imagine what may have happened when that happened. So anyway, that is one way, using a nonsense symbol to sort of make sure that the students can sort of feel, ooh, I'm being evaluated, and I don't really know how that evaluation is going, because the immigrants would have felt bewildered during that process. There was lack of communication. They did have interpreters, but they may not have known exactly they wouldn't have known exactly what was being discussed. So then at the end, there are some fun suggestions, like having a Welcome to America party. Definitely have the students share their feelings in that debriefing on how it felt to go through that process. You could even have the students make a leap into the future, so that by asking them what's happened to the immigrants since they came to America. Did they become a U.S. citizen? And you could also simulate then a naturalization ceremony, so the students could get a feel for what that is. Do you think your students would gain an emotional connection to immigration? I definitely do. If I had to go through that process, especially making it as uncomfortable as you possibly can, I think they would understand, and it's applicable to today's times and what we're dealing with immigrants today and how they feel and how they're being treated. You know, you can definitely relate it to today now. So much for history not being applicable to today. But I definitely think that as you're discussing immigration in this time period, the students will remember more because they have such an emotional connection to it now. So if you have any thoughts on this particular simulation and what you think, I'd be happy to hear it. This was the tag and inspection card, so it's all on one sheet, easy to print. I want to show you a simulation that I've gotten to see with adults, so I know exactly how engaging even grown-ups have during this particular History's Mysteries. It's not going to be under Inactive Classroom as a simulation. It's actually as a PowerPoint because it includes a PowerPoint. But I think it is a simulation. It includes everything except having a role as a person during that time. Instead, the students have a role as an investigator. So this activity is also 100 minutes, and I love that it includes creative response, critical thinking, and decision-making skills. All those things that we're working on for higher level, deeper thinking. The Black Death is always engaging for students. You can make it a really fun, mysterious. You could turn the lights down low. I put up crime scene tape. Even at the end, the person that gets the most accurate and completes it the fastest would get to become the, I think it was the investigator of the year. So you could have one for each class and post them on the wall. So this is a fun simulation and it's very hands-on. So let's see what you think. So the authentic task is given to think like a criminalist. They get forensic files, then they travel around to view the evidence, and they must decipher that evidence. They'll use the case files from the crime scene, from the coroner's report, and from the detective's research. So using all of this information, which is going to be text, pictures, primary sources, secondary sources, all maps, all of that, they make a decision on what they think. Then they open the mystery file, and the mystery file contains what actually happened. So you can imagine that this particular simulation would be much better at the beginning before they really know a whole lot. They're sort of getting an introduction to all the parts, then they make a decision, and then the information is laid out as you continue teaching about it. But they're going to remember the pictures and the maps and all the things they did. They'll remember their how they dissected each picture and all of the things that they wrote about it. So they have to look very closely to what is happening. So as you can see on the left, you've got a teacher's guide, the PowerPoint, the press release, which is your mystery file. And then you have a lot of other things. So all of these text message news alert, front page news alert, that's an extension if you want to do that. So this is the first slide of the PowerPoint, and it gives you an essential question if you want to use it. How did the bubonic plague change life in Europe during the 1300s? So I would definitely post this somewhere where students can add as they're working. This particular History's Mysteries is really completed in one class session if they're about 60-minute class sessions. The next day they get the mystery folder, and then they can do their follow-up activities. So that's when you're really having your debriefing. So it's not a whole lot, and it's really not time consuming for you. You print these slides from the PowerPoint and place them around the room. Then you print the forensics report, which they're going to fill out, but you really only need one per group. And then you watch. It's so much fun to hear what they talk about, to hear how things change as they're going through each of the files. They can go in any order so that you can have everybody working at the same time. And the students are incredibly engaged and interested in what they're doing. It was one that sometimes you worry, especially when you're having one person write, that that's the person that's going to pretty much be doing everything. But they, with students and adults, I've seen that they are really engaged with looking at each of the pictures, because let me show you one slide. So this is Area 3, Detectives Research. You can see the detectives badge there. And you can see the leeches and the people on the beds that are having magical charms and prayers said over them, it looks like. You see the mask. Then on the right-hand side, these are 3 other pages. Can't remember exactly how many are with this. I think it was about 9. So they're really having to not only read the text and make notes about that, but also go through each of the pictures and look and make their decision based on all of this evidence. It's really fun also to have them present their decision of what they think happened. Let me make sure. So I did want to let you know that in the forensic report that they're filling out, so they're going to review the objects and describe what they see, the people, describe what they look like, location details. There's one where even this particular, one of the slides brings in the fact that the Jews were thought to have been the cause. So you're getting a lot of history and sort of little twists and turns that the students really love. You're also going to review the coroner, so you're going to have to look at the victims and describe their injuries in great detail, and then write down the information you think is useful to make your decision, and then make your decision. So that's really what the forensics report is. Most students would not think that that was complicated or hard to do, I think, especially when you're doing it as a group together. So I love this one. I've done it several times, and I just think it's an excellent simulation. Do you agree that it's still a simulation, even though there's not exactly role playing? The final one that I wanted to talk to you about, let me make sure, oh, we're short on time. So just real quick, a principal has asked the school board to decide what restaurants should be in their food court. They want the restaurants, of course, that are going to make the most money. But as always, you also have to meet the needs of all the groups within the school. So the students get a memo from the principal, and your principal could actually bring it in. That'd be kind of neat. Then they look at who's applying, so all of the different restaurants. They have some tables to show demand and price. They also then get some lovely voicemails. And these voicemails are telling them what each group wants. So once they put all of this information together, they can present. And I thought it would be fun to maybe get with your high school cafeteria and whatever food was chosen, maybe it was pizza or something, and have that day. That would be something fun to do with it. So then they'll present and have their final decision out there. So they're using so many economic concepts, which written on paper and using definitions are not easy for every student to get. I still sometimes have trouble with some of the economics of things. But if we actually did it, if we actually use them in the scenario, their understanding now of those concepts is going to be much greater. This particular simulation is going to be 300 minutes. Remember, you can adjust that to fit what you need. There's also a little test about what they've learned at the bottom, so that's a great assessment that's automatically included in. Finally, what do you think? Can simulations work in a high-stakes testing world? Shoot me out a quick yes or no. What do you think? I definitely think so, because I think it creates students that can think. So not only are they going to be able to apply it here, they'll be apply it in other situations and on the test. I agree. Much better than drill and kill. It just goes away too fast. And my brain doesn't hold things very easily anyway. So if I don't really learn it, I really have to work hard. I really had to work hard in school. I think it also gives students that don't feel good about maybe themselves as a student, it gives them an opportunity to shine through simulations, and I love that. They absolutely are thinking and applying what they learn. And that automatically makes learning deeper. So for my final thing that I wanted to tell you, what do pilots, the Pentagon, medical students, lawyers, what do they all have in common? They all use simulations to better prepare themselves for the situations that may arise. And these are very important life-changing jobs, but they use simulations because that's what works. And that's where they can get the hands-on practice to be better. So I thank you all so much for attending today. I really enjoyed this. I hope I tried to hold back a little bit of that passion that I have for this. But if you want any more information, if you want to know more about Active Classroom and the resources, email pgothard@socialstudies.com, and that's Pam Gothard. And I want to tell you all thank you so much again, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.